So today I'm going to talk about Illuminism, and the title of my talk is From Arche to Omega Point. So you may not be familiar with these terms, but I hope as we go through the talk that you will understand what I'm referring to. So throughout history, there has always been a kind of underlying mystery about existence. Are we really capable of understanding reality itself? And for example, Ralph Waldo Emerson claimed that the enigma can always be beyond our grasp, that we'll never be able to fully understand reality. In modern times, there's a branch of philosophy called New Mysterianism. And Mysterianism is basically the idea that there are several fundamental and practical issues that we will never be able to understand because we are cognitively closed to them. What that means is that our intelligence cannot access these problems because we're just basically not smart enough. Sort of analogous to the idea of, could you explain how a television works to a dog? It's just not possible because they don't have the cognitive capacity to even understand the language that we're expressing ourselves in. So according to the New Mysterians, there are likewise some problems in philosophy that are beyond our grasp, such as mind and consciousness, the nature of ultimate reality, the origin and fate of the universe, how can free will exert itself in a purely material universe? So if everything is mechanical, if the Big Bang was purely a material event, and everything has been sort of rolling like clockwork since then, everything is preordained, how can we actually influence the system? How can we exert free will? So the New Mysterians, such as Colin McGinn, believe that we just can't get into these problems with our minds. So Illuminism is basically the idea that that's not so. That we've kind of crossed a threshold cognitively, that there may have been certain problems that were inaccessible to us in the past, but somehow we've kind of crossed a cosmic level of intelligence. We've crossed a threshold of intelligence that allows us to actually reach into these problems and start to understand them, start to solve them. So what is Illuminism? It's basically a theory of everything. It's a holistic approach to knowledge. It's the idea that as a species, we can understand reality. We can put the pieces together. But we have to assemble these jigsaw pieces and put them together into a coherent picture. These pieces have been scattered throughout history in space and time. Over thousands of years, there's been various geniuses, various deep thinkers that have sort of penetrated into the heart of certain mysteries. But these insights have not really been assembled into a coherent picture that is coherent and that is comprehensible in its entirety. So that's the basic idea of Illuminism, that we can construct this holistic understanding of reality and assemble these pieces of knowledge. So one of the reasons that we kind of got into this mess, so to speak, of believing that we could never understand everything, I believe, is because of the rise of materialism. So materialism is basically the idea that only matter is real, that nothing else exists. It's it's a very ancient idea. It kind of really took off in a big way with Isaac Newton. So he claimed that in the beginning, God formed matter in solid, massive, hard particles. So hard that they can never be broken, they can never be destroyed. I believe that matter was eternal, that nature was eternal in this form. So he wasn't the only person that said this, but he was a big proponent of this idea that matter was the only reality. But can everything be explained in terms of just moving particles obeying Newton's laws? Is the universe just a giant clock? Is nature just a machine? And is there absolutely no room for a so-called ghost in the machine? Is there nothing spiritual or mental? Well, in the last century, there were, as some of you probably know, there were certain shocking discoveries in physics. So quantum mechanics, there were various discoveries in quantum mechanics showing that there were various aspects of reality that appeared to be mind-like. So, modern atomic theory is no longer, according to Werner Heisenberg, modern atomic theory is no longer the full explanation for the universe. The physicists weren't looking for mind-like aspects of reality in nature, but it was revealed to them by their experiments. We need to take into account these monumental discoveries in quantum mechanics, which have not really been fully appreciated even today, even though this was over 100 years ago. So what was discovered is that what we think of as a particle can also behave as a wave. There's like an energetic, mind-like component to the particle. And there were various experiments over the decades which showed that depending on the way that the particle was observed, it could behave as a wave. For example, the double slit experiment, the Bell and aspect experiments, entanglement. Basically the idea that, it's possible to entangle two particles together, separate them by huge distances, and they will remain entangled. If you change the state of one particle, the other particle will instantaneously change. And this experiment has been verified over greater and greater and greater distances, so that it's been shown that information transfer between the particles is occurring many, many times faster than the speed of light. So basically instantaneously. What that points to is something called non-locality, that there is an aspect of reality that is non-local, that information can exist outside of space and time. So particles can leave the empirical world and exist as a form of potentiality, as a wave. They only become actualized when they are observed. So what does all this mean? I believe that the full implications of quantum mechanics have not been realized. So in other words, what the implications are is that the basis of the material world is non-material. So there's a domain of reality which is beyond our five senses. Schrödinger's quantum mechanics, basically it came down to the discovery that particles behave as waves unless they are observed. Electrons and atoms are not really particles as such, but standing waves. They're vibrating mathematical forms. they're empty. They don't really contain any mass. If you could zoom in on an atom, for example, it's 99.99% empty space. You'll see there's an electron cloud around the nucleus of the atom, but if you can only perceive the electron as a particle if it's observed. If it's unobserved, it's a wave, it's a cloud around the nucleus. Likewise, if you zoom in into the nucleus of the atom, you may see different numbers of protons and neutrons, depending on the element that you're looking at. But likewise, go even further into the structure of the proton and the neutron, you will find that those protons and neutrons are composed of quarks. What are quarks made of? They may be made of preons. You go even deeper into that, you will find that they're made of, according to one theory, they're made of strings, which are one-dimensional units of vibrating energy. String theory is kind of problematic because it puts the limit at one dimension. Why would it be one-dimensional that is the limit of reality? What if it's actually zero-dimensional? So this gets to the heart of the problem of idealism versus materialism. So, like I said, materialism is the idea that all that exists is matter, solid particles that were somehow created at the Big Bang. Conversely, there's been a very long tradition of something called idealism. This is the idea that reality is basically a mental phenomenon. And these basic ideas have kind of been at war for centuries, if not millennia. What we do know is that, according to the quantum world, science can't exactly tell us what the world is like in a true sense. So we can observe the world with our five senses, and it instructs us about various things, but it also deceives us in some ways. According to idealism, the basis of reality is non-material. There's an invisible part that we can't measure. We can't detect it empirically. It's a non-empirical aspect of reality. And this is supported by the absolute emptiness of matter, the double slit, the aspect experiments, the wave-particle duality supports idealism. That mind is a cosmic property. And by mind, I don't mean consciousness. So I'm not saying that the entire universe is conscious. But what I am saying is that there's like a mind-like aspect of reality, in the sense that it's non-material. Consciousness is only a late development in the cosmic evolution of the universe. So it's something that, develops gradually, but the underlying phenomenon of non-materialism is more like unconscious mind. So where did idealism really start? It started with the Pythagoreans. Maybe even earlier, maybe in certain Egyptian traditions, Hermes Trismegistus. So what the Pythagoreans were searching for was like a fundamental aspect of reality with which they could understand the world. They were looking for the arc that I put in the title of the talk. That they were looking for something that was uncreated, that is eternal, that exists outside of space and time. And there were various philosophers before Pythagoras that proposed various explanations for what the arc may be. For example, Hesiod claimed it was kind of a chaos. Thales said it was water. Anaximander said it was a pyrrhon, which is kind of a formless substance that could sort of create other things, but he didn't really explain what it was. But for Pythagoras, he believed that the ultimate nature of reality was actually number, it was mathematics. Why did he say that? Because he reasoned that mathematics is something that exists independently of space and time. So, for example, I can say that there's one cup here, there's one phone, there's one table. But what about the number one itself? So, I can close my eyes, I can block my ears, I can lie in a sensory deprivation tank, and I can still conceive of the number one. So it kind of exists everywhere and also nowhere. It exists in the mind. So the actual concept of the number one does not exist in space and time. It exists as a mental phenomenon. So that's how Pythagoras came to this realization that the underlying fundamental basis of reality was mathematics. So going back a little bit to physics again, what do these various mind-like results from quantum mechanics indicate? I believe it indicates that quantum mechanics is the mind of the universe. So there's actually a mental component to reality that's outside of space and time. It's non-local. Everything is connected in this non-local singularity. And we are each individually connected to this non-dimensional arc or singularity. We don't normally perceive it. So, it's a dual aspect existence. So there is a dimensional, apparently material component to reality, but the underlying sort of framework of reality is mental. But what happened, I believe, is that it was kind of an embarrassment to science to have these discoveries coming from quantum physics that, you can have non-local exchange of information, that particles can be separated light years apart and they can still exchange information instantaneously. It was kind of a very bad for business, bad for public relations. Like, how do you explain that? But if you look at the history books, you'll see that a lot of the quantum physicists, Nobel Prize winners, they actually they became kind of spiritual or mystical because of these discoveries, but they didn't actually sort of explain that to the public. They kept it to themselves. For them, take Oppenheimer, for example. Brilliant man. He was involved in the director of the Manhattan Project. He actually went and studied the original Hindu texts. He studied Vedanta. He studied the Bhagavad Gita. He even learned Sanskrit. So Oppenheimer actually learned Sanskrit so that he could study the ancient Hindu manuscripts himself. It's kind of like this revolution never really, it's certainly unfinished. In a way, it never really happened. So it's like it was just kind of brushed under the carpet. It's like, we don't want to deal with this. It's just too much for people. So in Illuminism, mind is the fundamental reality. And what is mind? It's a form of energy. Thoughts have the nature of potentiality. So thought creates reality. Everything that we see around us, for example, initially existed in somebody's mind. This piece of cookie, this table, this computer, first existed as thought. So somebody conceived of the idea and then actualized it. You know, even this library that we're sitting in first existed in somebody's thought. But it doesn't mean that thought is the only thing. So reality is objective and subjective. So Illuminism is a type of what's called in philosophy dual aspect monism, which means literally two sides of the same thing. So matter is basically, could be conceived of as a form of dimensional mind. And mind could be thought of as dimensionless matter. So there are actually two aspects of the same thing. We know from E equals mc squared that mind, so that energy can create matter. And there's actually been some experiments in physics very recently converting light directly into matter. I don't know if you saw those just a few months ago. So Illuminism is basically the idea that reality, so it can be expressed in this very, very simple equation. Reality, or the R, is both greater than equal to zero. What does that mean? It means that it's dimensional and dimensionless. So there are two aspects, and those together both encompass reality. And I believe that our minds are actually connected to a cosmic mind. And I don't mean like a god or some sort of paternal deity or something of that kind. That there is like a mental component of reality. So we have our individual consciousness, which is a form of mind. If you go deeper, you will get to the unconscious mind. You go deeper than that, you will reach the collective unconscious, which is kind of a cosmic fields of thought. But we don't usually access that domain. So only under very rare circumstances will our mind connect to the cosmic mind. But in those rare instances, you will see synchronicities, you will see evidences of the paranormal, you will see so-called extrasensory perception, which is beyond the traditional five senses. But we don't really understand how that works, so it's a very random phenomenon. But one consequence of this mind-like aspect to reality is that there are various non-local phenomena that transcend the materialism of classical physics. And this was expressed by David Bohm, the quantum physicist, who many consider to be the heir of Einstein. He sort of used, he coined his own terminology to explain this. The explicate order, which is the unfolded dimensional aspect of reality, and the implicate order. So the explicate comes from the implicate. What we see as dimensional reality, for example, ABC here, so this would be a dimensional, three-dimensional representation of the world as we're existing it now. In the implicate order, in the singularity, in the mind-like domain, is actually one thing. So you have this dual aspect monism. And so this has also been termed the perennial philosophy. The idea that all things are numbers. And it's an all-pervading truth. So I'm going to switch now a little bit to taking a sort of more broader perspective. What can we actually say about reality itself? So, you know, on the one hand, there is the non-local aspect of reality that's revealed by quantum mechanics. But what about the origin of reality? What about the so-called beginning of everything? We can formulate certain principles. For example, existence cannot come from non-existence. What do I mean by that? So if there was ever a case that there was absolutely nothing, and I mean No space, no time, no particles, no quantum fluctuations, no excuses like that. I mean, absolutely nothing at all. Then that would always be the case. There would always be nothing, because how could you have existence itself suddenly coming from this non-existence? It doesn't make any logical sense. So, in Illuminism, this is explained by the fact that nothing cannot exist, which is a very elusive thing to contemplate, but what it means is that if you conceive of nothing, so nothing exists, but if you say that nothing exists, then it's automatically something. You're saying that nothing exists as something. It doesn't make any logical sense. So there's actually a sort of a logical paradox at the very heart of reality itself. And I'll get to, I'll talk about this in a little later, but what we can conclude from that is that there has always been some form of existence. What the Greeks call the arche, a fundamental basis of existence. And it's uncreated, it's necessary, it's a logical solution to a paradox. And what we can conclude from this is that the universe is eternal. However, it's not static and is always in a state of change. It's always in a state of becoming something else. Like existence itself is continuously flowing. It's not being, it's becoming. So even everybody, all of us here are becoming something else from moment to moment. This room is changing, we are changing. So reality is eternal, but it's in a constant state of becoming. Like I said, what is the arche? In Illuminism, the arche is mathematics. So electrons, it's the most logical way to think of electrons are numbers. Because what is energy? Like if you ask a physicist, like what is energy itself, they won't really be able to tell you. Like we can observe the effects of energy. Like energy is a form of eliciting change in the world, but there isn't really, you can't really point to something and say, there, that's the energy right there. It's easier to actually think of it as a mathematical property, as numbers. And again, this goes all the way back into antiquity. Pythagoras said all things are numbers. The harmony of the cosmos is based on the ratio of numbers. Nicholas de Cusa, number was the first model of things in the creator's mind. I'm not saying that there is a creator, but that's how he formulated it. Plato, real atoms aren't material things, but mathematical forms. So what is this fundamental unit of the arche? In Illuminism, the fundamental unit is zero. So that's the inevitable solution to the paradox of something and nothing. What satisfies the mathematical property of being both something and nothing? Zero. So zero is unique in the sense that it is something, it can be represented mentally, but it is also nothing. It's the nothing that exists. It's the resolution to that previous paradox I was talking about. And Leibniz, who was actually, Gottfried Leibniz was actually the first scientist to conceive of this idea. So he called zero a mathematical monad. And monad basically means unit, sort of uncreated unit. So zero is something that is uncreated, so it satisfies the postulate of existence cannot be created by an external agency. So zero is a logical necessity at the heart of reality. It's also eternal. And it contains within itself actually the whole of mathematics. And I'm not going to get into the details today, but the basic idea is that monads themselves are imbued with, I wouldn't say the desire to actualize, but they are within zero, and I'll explain why in just a second. There is a force to become more. Why do I say that? I'll just give me one moment. According to Leibniz, if zero can be created spontaneously, if it's necessary, if it's eternal, according to his postulate of the principle of sufficient reason, there's no reason why there can't be an infinite number of zeros, an infinite number of monads. If these monads exist in a non-dimensional form, you can have an infinite number of them. If you can have one, you can have as many as you want. You can have an infinite number of zeros, monads. So what does that mean? It means that at the heart of reality, you have zero and infinity. And both of these properties exist outside of space and time. Between zero and infinity, you have all the other numbers. All of those numbers exist between zero and infinity. And I don't just mean real numbers, I mean imaginary numbers, irrational numbers, complex numbers. The entirety of mathematics can have its origin in the singularity. So mathematics is ontological, it actually has meaning. But mind, so zero and infinity exist in this non-dimensional domain. But basically everything else exists within our dimensional realm. So again, it's this dual aspect monism. Mathematics is both non-dimensional, zero and infinity. They cannot exist within a dimensional domain. But other mathematics exist within our dimensional domain. And monads contain within themselves, as I said, the whole of mathematics. Can actually be represented by Euler's formula. There's this remarkable, it's referred to as the God equation by some mathematicians, that you have the natural logarithm, the imaginary number, the natural logarithm to the power of the imaginary number, and pi plus 1 equals 0. So the entirety of mathematics is actually represented on this side of the equation. And remarkably, it adds up, it equates to 0. So, zero, even this is not something just sort of constructed for Illuminism. This is actually mainstream mathematics. So, these eternal mathematical constants are equal to 0. So 0, everything can come from 0. And you can even represent, this has been represented on the complex plane, where, for example, you have imaginary numbers on this axis and real numbers. And, again, all of the numbers can be represented by these physical constants. But where do these physical constants exist? Can you detect, can you touch them? Can you smell them? Can you taste them? No. Can you see them? No. They are existing beyond our five senses and outside of space and time. So where do they exist? In Illuminism, they exist in the so-called singularity. So this is the origin of everything. The singularity is uncreated. So again, it doesn't make any logical sense to say that it was created. Because if you say God created it, then you've just gone one step further back. You've made an iteration in the question, but you haven't answered it, because where did this creator God come from? It doesn't solve anything. So you have to have something at the heart of reality which is uncreated. It has to be necessary. It has to be eternal. It has to exist outside of space and time. And it is actually composed of an infinite number of mathematical monads, of ontological zeros. It has a mind-like property, and infinite potentiality is contained in that mind, but it's not conscious mind. It's also known in various traditions as the All. So what we normally think, in standard cosmology, we say that the universe came from the Big Bang. But where did this bang, so-called bang, come from? Where did this energy come from? Where did the dimensionality come from? It came from the singularity, which is eternal. So what was the Big Bang? It was really an acquisition of dimensionality by this mathematical singularity. So you had an infinite number of mathematical monads, which had an inherent, reluctant to use the word desire, but we'll do for now, an inherent desire to actualize themselves dimensionally. So the Big Bang was actually a mathematical event. It wasn't a bang at all. If you think about it, why do we say bang? It doesn't make any sense. There was nobody there to hear a sound. There was actually no sound. There certainly wasn't any air available. And sound is really a conscious perception of vibrating air molecules anyway. So, and there was no taste, there was no smell, there was no touch. It was a non-sensory event. There was also no light, in the sense that what we see, what we perceive as light, is photons actually interacting with our retina and then producing an electrical signal in the brain. But photons themselves, if you could actually perceive a photon as it really is, it's pure energy, it's vibrating, non-dimensional energy. And photons actually don't have any mass, and they exist outside of space and time. But that's I'm not going to get into that today. But basically, the Big Bang is a total misnomer. It was a mathematical equation that was seeking to self-actualize itself. And actually, this comes to another issue that I've already touched upon, that mind and matter are really two aspects of the same thing. So the reason that we, can apparently interact with matter with our minds, that we can, mind can interact with matter is because they're really two aspects of the same thing. But matter is dimensional mind, and mind is dimensionless matter. So, there's been, this sort of long-standing conundrum, this paradox of what is mind and how can it interact with matter? Are they two different things? No, they're the same thing, but one is dimensionless, the other is dimensional. And even in mainstream physics, and even in biology, there is a mathematical formula that's used in, for example, MRIs to scan the brain. And, you can even download software off the internet that will convert, for example, here, a two-dimensional image into a frequency representation. And this branch of mathematics is called Fourier transforms. And it can convert dimensional information into frequency. An inverse Fourier transform can convert frequency into dimensional, so you can go both ways. So in Illuminism, the nature of reality is this dual aspect monism, but the two interact through Fourier transformations. And this comes to, now we come to the question of, we've dealt with the actual Big Bang, the creation event, the so-called creation event. But what about the actual nature of the universe itself? What about all that exists around us? if you look at the physical constants, you will see that there is like apparently an enormous amount of fine-tuning has gone into the construction of the universe. So if you change the cosmological constant just by a few percent, you'll never have the formation of galaxies. You change change the strength of gravity by a few percent, you'll never have anything but hydrogen. There's literally hundreds of these apparent fine-tunings of the physical constants, which has gone into creating a habitable, life-sustaining universe. Like, how is that possible? I see it that there's basically three choices. One is that the universe was designed by a creator, which I don't believe. Another possibility is that we just live in a randomly picked universe that just happens to be right. It's just pure chance out of, trillions and trillions and trillions of possibilities. It just happened. Nothing needs to be explained, and which is in a way kind of the end of science, because what can we do? We'll never understand it. The alternative third explanation is that because there is an inherent mind-like property to the universe, mind is actualizing itself through dimensionality. Therefore, it is designing it in what appears to be the right way. And this is being self-driven by quantum processes, which enforces choices that lead to optimal results. So, within this explanation, there are self-actualizing aspects to reality. And even the physical constants themselves have evolved to create a life-sustaining universe. So evolution actually goes back even to the mathematical state, to a non-dimensional state. The physical constants were optimized because the universe is alive. Why is it suited for life? Because life is an inherent property of the cosmos. Which kind of explains the improbability of life. How could life come from non-life? Like, what is the dividing line? Is a bacteria alive? Most people would say yes, it's alive. Is a virus alive? Most people say yes again. But what is a virus really? It's just DNA surrounded by a protein capsule. Go even further. Go even further back. Is a piece of RNA alive? Well, that's when people would start to say, well, it's kind of it's coding for life, but it's not really life. But what about self-replicating RNA? There's various forms of RNA that can self-replicate. Even, prion diseases are examples of replicating proteins, so you don't even need RNA. So in Illuminism, the basic idea is that there is no clear separation between life and non-life, that life is an inherent property of the universe itself. And evolution is a mental process. It's teleological. It's evolving towards something. The universe is alive. It's self-actualizing. It wasn't designed by a creator. Didn't just put it all together and, but it has self-optimizing, self-actualizing properties. What is that? Life. And there have so that is kind of a technical overview of this idea of a self-creating, self-actualizing cosmos. But there have actually been sort of mystical interpretations of that idea throughout the ages. And one of these ideas was the concept of the demiurge. This was basically a sort of anthropomorphized conception of a material universe. So according to the Gnostics, this ancient religion, they made a distinction between the highest what they called unknowable God, what I call the singularity, this eternal mental domain, and the demiurgic creator of the material world. So in Gnostic thought, they represented the demiurge as an antagonistic to the will of the supreme being. So this is kind of represented here by the singularity outside of space and time. But the demiurge created dimensionality, created space and time as a kind of emanation of the singularity. And this act of creation occurred in an unconscious semblance of the divine model and is fundamentally flawed, or formed with the malevolent intention of entrapping aspects of the divine in matter. Yep.
Is that supposed to be a representation of the earth and then the sun, and then our core of the earth?
I think that's the earth, and these are the planets, and this is space and time. There's actually an Ouroboros here, which is like the snake eating its own tail. So that's kind of cyclic. So anyway, in this system, the demiurge is kind of a solution to the problem of evil. Because these mystics, these philosophers were struggling with the idea, why would, if there is a God, why would he create evil? Why would he create suffering? So the Gnostic solution was, well, it's not the true God. Like the true God is, eternal. That's what we would call the singularity. But the demiurge was kind of like an emanation of the singularity which created the material domain. I don't believe this, but this is what the Gnostics. This is how they conceptualize the universe. So, what is gnosis? What does Gnosticism mean? It's a Greek noun for knowledge, basically. So in Christian, Islamic, or Jewish mysticism, the mystery religions, gnosis signifies like a spiritual knowledge or religion of knowledge, in the sense of like a mystical enlightenment or insight. So why did they want this enlightenment? Why did they want this insight? Because they wanted to connect to the true God, to the singularity, and overcome the demiurge. So they wanted to. This is represented here by the material domain, by space-time. They wanted to actually understand true reality. So I don't believe personally that the demiurge is an existent being, but that was their way of conceptualizing the acquisition of dimensionality by the singularity, by the arc. So they personified it in this concept of the demiurge, because it's the only way they could explain this flawed creation. All this suffering that we still see even today, and the problem of evil. Reality appears to be just a form of consumption. Animals eat each other. We fight. We have wars. This was their conceptualization of this. I believe that that's not an accurate explanation, and I will offer my alternative explanation in a couple of slides. But speaking of the demiurge, speaking of creation from the singularity, what can we say about that logically? Well, God is traditionally viewed as the pinnacle of intelligence and power and complexity. So we normally attribute these divine attributes to the deity. But how could such qualities exist at the very beginning of everything? How can you start with infinite intelligence, power, and complexity? Where did this being come from? How did it acquire these divine attributes? It doesn't make any logical sense. Rather, the universe is evolving in complexity over time. So one way to think of that is that the universe is God in potentia. It was not created by God, but is becoming God. The universe is creating God. And one way to think of that is in what another Greek term called entelechy. So this was an idea of Aristotle, that in philosophy it means that which realizes or makes actual what is otherwise merely potential. And it's intimately connected with the distinction between matter and form, or the potential and the actual. So like I said earlier, like you can sort of think of life, or human life, beginning as pure potential. It's one cell, you know. It doesn't really have any ability to interact with the material world. You know, we start out in the womb, we're completely dependent on our mother. You know, even as babies, we're kind of helpless. But as we go through life, we become more and more actual, more and more realized. And, you know, this is entelechy. In Illuminism, the universe itself is actually imbued with entelechy. It's actualizing itself. It's becoming more and more realized. But the infinite potential within it is becoming more and more realized. And actually, the Gottfried Leibniz called those mathematical monads entelechies, interestingly enough, by virtue of their self-determined activity. And entelechy was also revived around the turn of the 20th century by Hans Driesch in connection with vitalistic biology. So, you know, I don't believe that Darwinism, for example, is the complete explanation of evolution. I'm not going to get into that today. I think that it's true to some extent, but I don't think that just random mutation and selection can explain the immense complexity that has arisen in the universe. But I'm not going to get into that. But another way to think about entelechy is that it's kind of the meaning of life. So, we think of, if you ask somebody, you ask 100 people, what is the meaning of life to you? You'll get a variety of answers. Some people will say to be happy, happiness, wealth, to acquire knowledge, just to have a good time, to help others, to live long. But these are really all like conversions of potential into actuality. They are making real what is pure potential. So I would say that one way to think about the meaning of life is to actualize potential. Whatever that means to you personally, and to help others to realize their potential. I don't think it's the ultimate meaning of life. I'm going to give my proposal for that in a few slides, but it's one way to think of it. So how does the universe actually actualize this potential? I believe it operates through something called the dialectic. So the German philosopher Hegel proposed the idea of the dialectical model, that you can sort of create higher levels of complexity in being through this dialectical process. And what does that mean? It means that you start with a thesis, with a proposition, an idea, some form of something, and you may come to realize that there's an antithesis or antithesis that is kind of incompatible with the thesis. So it doesn't fit within this idea. But rather than regarding them as complete opposites or irreconcilable counterparts, you can actually create a synthesis of these new ideas. And this actually, happens in history. It also happens kind of in life. It happens biologically, where there will be something in the environment which is incompatible with the kind of form of life that's existing in that environment, and there will be a sort of, you could think of it as a synthesis to create a new form. So this is kind of like a more scientific way of thinking of the demiurge. So it explains evil because, you know, we need to go through this dialectical process to evolve to higher levels of complexity and intelligence and understanding. But it takes billions of years. You know, we started out as the universe began as pure, just photons, energy. Then you had hydrogen, helium, you know, the stars burned for billions of years. They created second generation stars. Then eventually you have life, but life itself has been incredibly brutal and incredibly painful. You know, life feeds off itself. So it's like a more scientific explanation for evil, you know, compared with the concept of the demiurge. So the demiurge I was describing is really a sort of anthropomorphized concept of the dialectic. You know, so the dialectic is what we are actually experiencing, but the Gnostics kind of conceived as this sort of creator deity that formed this material domain to cause suffering. That doesn't really make any sense. So what does this mean within the grand scheme of things? That through entelechy and through the dialectic, through cosmic evolution, the universe is converting infinite potential that exists in the singularity into maximum actualization. So this is time along here on the x-axis. This is potential. At the very beginning, there was no actualization of that potential whatsoever. So it was just pure potential up here. And that you can think of that as chaos, you know, as just mathematical monads. You know, did the laws of mathematics and physics exist in the chaos, or were they created from the chaos? I don't know, but in either case, the arc it was the sort of dialectical solution. So it was the self-solving, inevitable result of that equation, which can create a dimensional universe. So that is the Big Bang. So the law. So you know, if you ask a physicist, where do the physical laws exist? You know, where do the laws of mathematics exist? You know, they don't. You can't touch them. They, you know, and how are they? As I said, they seem to be incredibly fine-tuned to creating the universe, to a habit, you know, a life-sustaining universe. I believe that they existed prior to what we call the Big Bang, the acquisition of dimensionality. So this potential is converted into actuality. I've shown it here as complexity. So at some point you reach the level of a human being. But, you know, human beings are, you know, we're still a long way from realizing the full inherent potential that existed at the very beginning in the singularity. And this full realization of that potential has been referred to by various researchers as the omega point. You know, this is where all of the potential inherent in the singularity is converted into actuality. So it's, you know, fully actualized intelligence, fully actualized complexity, power, love, all of these attributes that we usually ascribe to the divine cannot exist here, they exist here. They are ahead of us. You know, it could also be called God. You know. So I think most traditional religions have it completely the wrong way around. But what happens when you fully actualize this potential? So all of the potential is converted into actuality. God is fully manifested in the physical world. You know, God actually becomes a physical entity. The omega point is achieved. Well, there's really nothing to do at that point. You know, every paradox has been solved. Every you know, all of the potential has been converted into actuality. There are no more mysteries. Infinity has been, you know, infinite qualities have been kind of realized in the dimensional domain. So what do? You start over. You know? And this kind of goes back to the idea, the Hindu tradition, for example, the cyclical universe, that, in Hinduism they actually have three gods. The Brahma, the sort of creator god, Vishnu, the sustainer, and then, Shiva the sustainer, and Vishnu the destroyer. So, this is kind of represented scientifically by arc to omega point and then reset. So I think that they kind of intuitively realized that this was going on, but they kind of conceptualized it again by, in a sort of anthropomorphic form. So, again, what does this mean? It means that we can unify science and religion. Creator God is a logical impossibility, unless you consider the cyclical nature of the universe, in which case that God that is created at the very end could be thought of as initiating the new cycle. So in some sense, in that particular sense, you could say that God, that there, in that very narrow definition, you could say there was a creator God, because that God re-initiated the cycle. But the traditional conception of a creator God is a logical impossibility. But God as the end product of cosmic evolution is logical. And like I said, God is really becoming. God is not a static being entity. And we can actually use that dialectic that I talked about to actually explain this concept. So the thesis would be, there is a God. The antithesis, there is no God. The synthesis, God is becoming. So God is the arc, the alpha and the omega. God is the arc and the omega point. But at the very beginning, God is unrealized. God is sort of God in abscondus, so to speak, like his pure potential. And then God becomes fully realized. It also means, in some sense, that the entire universe is God, but doesn't become fully manifested until the omega point. So again, when we return to the meaning of life, what could we say about the meaning of life based on this concept? Well, one way to think of it is to actually bring about the omega point. So we are participants in this entire process. We can contribute, every one of us, to the realization of that omega point. So, this could be the ultimate meaning of life. So rather than actualizing our potential on an individual level, we can actually participate in the cosmic intellect. And actually, I discovered that Abraham Maslow, you may have heard of him for his, pyramid, his system of needs. For example, he conceived of this idea of having, body needs, security needs, social needs, ego needs, and only when someone has satisfied all of their basic needs can they self-actualize. So, life is hard. I don't know if many people actually get to the point where they can self-actualize. There's so many roadblocks along the way. But, if we do actually self-actualize, the way I think of it is that, I kind of constructed a cosmic version of the Maslow's hierarchy, where you have the arc, the Big Bang, stellar and biologic evolution. And then, once you get to the level of a human being, if somebody is self-actualized, they can actually kind of cross over and plug into this cosmic pyramid. And then we can contribute to the self-actualization of the cosmos. But, society is kind of not at that point yet. So, a lot of people never get to this point. So it's part of our responsibility, I believe, to enable as many people to self-actualize so that we can contribute to universal actualization. And Maslow, funnily enough, actually talked about this himself. He didn't publish it, but I found various references to this in the third person, some of it published, that he talked about what he called the fifth force towards the end of his life. And what he called the fifth force was imagine future psychology that could join the self-actualization of the individual human being with the cosmic actualization of the universe. So once someone is, once their needs are satisfied and they can self-actualize, then they can contribute to the wider actualization of the omega point. For me personally, how does this fit into life extension work? There's a very ancient Hermetic principle, as above, so below. So like a human life is a microcosm of the universe. As I said, we also individually convert potential into actuality. If we can extend our lifespans, it will maximize our own entelechy, the conversion of our own potential into actuality. So that's how I kind of see life extension research. It increases individual entelechy. So just for the last couple of slides, this is not directly related to Illuminism per se, but there's this sort of another perennial question: are we alone in the universe? Are we? There's the Fermi paradox. If life is so common in the universe, if advanced civilizations are common, where are they? Fermi famously said at Los Alamos one lunchtime to Edward Teller, "Where are they?" He didn't even preface it with an explanation, but they knew exactly what he was talking about. What he meant was, where are all these advanced civilizations? So far, there's no evidence of any other life or advanced life in the universe. I believe that life is common because I believe that life is an endogenous part of the universe itself. So life is probably widespread in the universe, but it takes many billions of years to actually get to the point that we are at. Maybe we are the first. I'm not the only one saying that. Max Tegmark is saying this, and various other cosmologists, that it's possible that we could be the first advanced civilization. So we need to be aware of overpopulation. We need to be, this planet could be incredibly privileged, incredibly rare. So it could be our responsibility and privilege to determine the future of the universe. If we are the first civilization within our galaxy or even further, we need to evolve to what I call hyperhumanity. We need to discard Abrahamism. It doesn't serve us anymore. These old, traditional religions, they don't drive us forward. They're holding us back. All of the old mythos-based religions no longer do. We have to move towards hyper-reason. We have to become hyper-rational. We have to develop our reasoning capabilities, develop our technology. That's the only way the omega point can be realized. And there may actually be no more important time to be alive in human history. We have life extension going on. We have the search for we have SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, still an open question whether we're alone or not. We have development of artificial intelligence. We will soon be able to explore we're already exploring the solar system with robots. In many ways, it's like a unique, very important time to be alive because we are developing the technologies to answer these questions. And particularly for life extension, I've said this before, but there will never be another generation that has the choice to fight for life extension, because in the past, it was just an impossible dream. The search for the fountain of youth, it was an idea in many people's minds, but it could never be realized. In the future, it will be solved. The magnitude of the decision, like 100 years from now, to extend your life will be equivalent to going out and buying a plasma television. It will be no more, no bigger than that, because all of the technology will be there. So there's only a very, very narrow group of human beings that will ever have the choice to fight for life extension, and that is us. Go back as far as you want in history, it was just a dream. In the future, it'll all be solved. So there's like a very narrow band. So that's life extension. All the other things, can we create these technologies? Can we give everybody the chance to self-actualize? If we don't, we can create a catastrophe. If we do, we can create a utopia. Which way are we going to go? I think we're right on this cross on the roads. So what's the final truth? That ultimate becoming is God. Another way to think of it is God is ultimate becoming. Oops, excuse me. But there is another stage beyond that. A community of gods. Our future. Before we realize the omega point, not us individually, but collectively our descendants will be evolving closer and closer to this omega point. There can be a community of gods. Can we create that divine community? Thank you. Thank you.